Stephen, could you start out maybe by explaining a bit about how you came to be involved with the USC Shoah Foundation?
Yeah, well, thank you, Susan, and thank you for inviting me today. And hello, everybody. It's wonderful that you support this centre in Naples and that all the work that you do with these young people is just so important. And I'm so privileged to be here today. So thank you. Susan, David mentioned that my brother and I had founded the UK Holocaust Centre. Actually, the journey for that began a long time ago when we were in our teens. My father was a Methodist minister, and my mother was a religious education teacher. We were, evangelical Protestant Christians, and I grew up in a mining village in Nottinghamshire, England. And just to say, Nottinghamshire is famous for Robin Hood, but you don't need to think about deer bounding through the forests. By that point, they discovered there was coal under the forests, and so they put their mining villages all across this countryside. And so I grew up not with Robin Hood, but actually a lot of coal miners. Now, we went on this trip to Israel, and I remember standing at the hotel at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, puzzled as a 13-year-old as to how it was that we'd gone to Israel to learn about our tradition and our own religious traditions. And I was standing there looking at the Jewish community, people coming on a Friday evening before Shabbat to the Western Wall, and thinking, what's going on here, and how come I don't understand it? That wonderful trip to Israel led me to start to inquire more about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. And the more I discovered, the more I found anti-Semitism deeply embedded in the Christian world, which was extremely distressing to discover. So actually, a little bit later on, I went back to Israel after my undergraduate degree, thinking I was going to write a PhD about anti-Semitism. Actually, anti-Semitism in the UK, which is probably just as well I didn't in the end, because I'd still be writing it now. So disturbing are the facts around that. When I was in Israel, I went to Yad Vashem, and it became clear to me and my brother James, who David just mentioned, that there we were. We'd grown up in the UK. We were even interested in things that related to the Jewish world, and hadn't had a single class on the Holocaust all the way through our school and through our university. And my brother was a medical doctor, and he said, how come I spent 13 weeks studying medical ethics and nobody mentioned the Nazi doctors? So we determined that we were going to change that. We went back to the UK, thought we would volunteer for a Holocaust organization, and there wasn't one. So we ended up in the end creating a Holocaust Centre, which is today is the National Holocaust Centre in the United Kingdom. I mean, it is in Nottinghamshire, in the centre of England, and a little bit like your museum there in Naples, has tens of thousands of young people come each year and visit. In the process of doing that, Susan, the genocide happened in Rwanda and in Bosnia, and we were looking at this and saying, it's so important that we do remember and we do tell the story of the Holocaust. But if it was happening today, what would we be doing about it? Would we find ourselves in a situation where, given a repeat of that situation, we would be bystanders all over again? And are we not being bystanders today in relationship to the genocide that's occurring? And so we created a second organization. It was called the Aegis Trust, and it's a genocide prevention organization. Put all of that together with the fact that I actually wrote my PhD on Holocaust survivor testimony, because I found that when I talked to the witnesses, not only was what they told me about their story very compelling, but the reason they told their story and the important lessons embedded in each of those terrible episodes that we hear from the survivors, but also the resilience and the triumph and the overcoming the death and destruction to create new lives, as I'm sure is true for many of the survivors and their families in your community, was just so powerful to learn. And so about 12 years ago, when Steven Spielberg was looking for somebody to help run the Shoah Foundation, I was very privileged to be invited to do that.
What an interesting path that led you there.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the Shoah Foundation and some of the current priorities of your organization.
Well, of course, everybody remembers Steven Spielberg making Schindler's List and the very big impact it had on our world. And of course, I was one of those people that saw that and saw such a seismic shift, particularly in the United Kingdom, where there hadn't been a confrontation with the past, and this film really did bring it to the fore. And then the opening up of the telling of the stories of the survivors. Never before in history have the victims of an event in history been the ones to write their own history. And this is a first because the survivors of the Holocaust have told the story in their own words in perpetuity. So we have this amazing treasure. And I know you have testimonies at your museum and so many other organizations. So between the Shoah Foundation and all the other organizations that have testimonies, we have well over 100,000 testimonies, and which about half of them are at the Shoah Foundation, that tell the story through the words of those that experienced it. But we're not a dusty archive of tapes that are sitting in a library somewhere at the University of Southern California. We're very much an organization that is out in the world, taking these stories into the lives of other people. Very often Holocaust survivors say to me, "Oh, I gave my story to Mr. Spielberg and I'm so happy that people are seeing it." Well, I can say to those Holocaust survivors today, yes, they are seeing it. 180 million minutes of it last year alone were viewed through the Shoah Foundation's portal. So a lot of people are spending time listening to the stories of Holocaust survivors, which is very good to see. But you know, our mission these days, Susan, it is to develop empathy, understanding, and respect through testimony. So it's not just the listening to the history, as important as that is to do, and to remember the victims and all that happened. It's to listen to the words of these survivors and to take them into our world and into our lives and act upon what they say to us. And what they said to me, you know, there's a very interesting part of the Shoah Foundation interviews, where at the very end of each interview, we would ask the Holocaust survivor or the witness to the Holocaust, what is your message to the future? And they wouldn't know this question is coming, and they wouldn't be told who to talk to. They would just answer that question, a very open question. And so I studied about 1,000 of those answers in different languages from different geographic regions to find out what did the survivors think that they wanted their testimony to be used for. And three very interesting things emerged. First of all, there's no question the survivors gave their testimonies in order to remember their loved ones and their families, and they hoped that the testimony they gave would continue to be a place of memory and respect for those that did not survive. Secondly, they wanted to make sure that they documented in the best way that they possibly could the history of what happened to them so that people could know what happened. And thirdly, at an equal level of these other two, was they want their testimony to be used in order to inspire others to behave in a better way and a more respectful way to other people and to prevent genocide happening to anybody, anywhere. It was very, very clear that these were the guiding principles. We're talking of 70% of them said those three things. It's a very high proportion. Then there were other topics: Israel, family, Jewish identity, and so forth. But I took from that something very important for the work that we do today. And that is that we have been empowered through their own words to take their testimonies and to use those testimonies to inspire others in the way in which they live their lives. Because it's very clear, had people behaved differently in Germany, had they been more outspoken, had they had deeper respect for their Jewish neighbors, had they not had hate embedded in their lives, then the Holocaust simply would not have been possible. It would have not happened. And so the fundamentals of this are actually in our everyday lives. We need to really think about each other and treat each other with deep respect. And it's not trivializing the Holocaust, it's taking their message and applying it in our lives every day. And that's what we try to do through our education programs. And I'm sure the same is very true for your museum too in Naples.
Yes. And those are the messages that our survivors here are always sharing as well. It is so important for them to continue to get that legacy out there, that treating everybody with respect and dignity is a basic lesson that we need to continue to teach. So we're so fascinated by the new technology that your organization has developed, and some people have heard of it before, but they might not have had the opportunity to see it in person, and they certainly have not had the opportunity to see the interview that you are going to share with us tonight, which is a world premiere.
Yes.
We first, to introduce this, we have a short video that Renee is going to share on her screen that explains what this technology does.
The Holocaust is an undeniable and horrific chapter in human history in which 6 million Jews and countless millions perished in genocide and crimes against humanity during the Second World War. Dimensions in Testimony is a new format of interview by which you can ask your questions of a Holocaust survivor who has videotaped answers to many questions, so that the questions that you have will be answered directly in person, life-size and 3D.
What was life like before the war?
I had a very happy childhood. I loved to be together with my family.
We understand very well the power of conversation between Holocaust survivors and the younger generation. We've seen it in our schools, we've seen it in our universities. That conversation, that moment of dialogue where I ask my question and I get it answered, is just it's magic in the room when that happens. And we wanted to try and find a way to preserve that as best possible. What's wonderful about conversing with these Holocaust survivors in this interactive form is that it's about you. It's about what you want to know. Conversation allows you to learn in a way that most suits your interest, and that's where the deepest learning takes place.
Do you feel hope for the future?
I always feel hopeful. If I wasn't hopeful, I wouldn't be talking to you or anybody else about my experiences.
I'm very happy that I was able to survive.
And here I am, I was one of the lucky ones.
The questions that students have is what's driving the learning experience, and so we know that this is important because we're going to enable them to be able to learn through their own curiosity. We are almost out of time to have deep conversations with Holocaust survivors. If we don't have these conversations now, they will never take place.
Great. So with that explanation, now we're going to see a live demo.
Indeed. So I'm going to introduce you in a second, everybody, to a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Ferencz. Benjamin lives in Florida. He is known for the fact that he was one of the prosecutors of the Nuremberg trials. And what people don't know about the Shoah Foundation is that we not only film Holocaust survivors and survivors of other genocides, but also we film people who have connection to the Holocaust and were witnesses to it. Benjamin Ferencz is particularly unusual because he's a veteran of the Second World War. He also was one of the liberators. He was with General Patton when they went into Buchenwald, a liberator of the camps, and one of the first witnesses. He then left Europe, hoping never to go back there again after what he'd seen. And because he was a Harvard Law graduate, he was recalled to Europe to help with the war crimes trials investigations, and in fact was one of the, was the first war crimes trial investigator appointed. He went to Berlin, and rifling through the archives in Berlin, he came across a file, and in that file he discovered there were telegrams and communications from the Eastern Front where the Einsatzgruppen were killing over 1 million Jews. And in that file, he saw the documentation of over 1.5 million Jewish people. He got on a plane, he went back to Nuremberg, and he went to the chief prosecutor and said, I found this file, I have the fingerprints of these people who sent this information to Berlin. We have to try these individuals. And he was told, listen, we have all the trials are filled up, there's no more room for any more. He said, in that case, I would like to try the case. When he walked into the courtroom, he was 26 years old, a veteran a war crimes trial prosecutor, a Harvard Law graduate who had never tried a case in life. And he had 24 Nazi killers in the dock. It was the biggest murder trial in history ever to date. And he prosecuted 24 Nazis who had 48 German lawyers defending them. And he was a 26-year-old Jewish kid who was about 5 foot tall with one assistant. And he successfully prosecuted all 24 of them. What is not known about Benjamin Ferencz is that he was also one of the founders of what became the Claims Conference. He started Jewish restitution, and all of the millions of dollars that went to Israel after the Second World War were negotiated by Ben. And all those yellow taxis that you see in Israel, you can thank him for those, because they said, we have no money. And he said, okay, you can pay in cars. And they've been paying in cars ever since. So a remarkable character of the 20th century. And today we're going to meet him for the first time ever interactively. Remarkably, Ben was filmed during the pandemic at home, and I had the chance to interview him for 8 hours in his apartment in Florida and talk to him about his life. And so he has a theory. It's called, well, let's just say hello to him first. Sorry, Ben. Hello, what is your name?
Hello, my name is Ben Ferencz.
He has a theory called law, not war. Let me ask him about that. What do you mean by law, not war?
Law, not war is a slogan because Americans love slogans and it's easy to remember. What I mean by that, instead of going to war, which will inevitably kill large numbers of innocent people, return to the rule of law to settle whatever differences there may be between nations. And if there is no court, you have no choice but to turn to force, armed force. If you turn to armed force and continue to turn to armed force, I'm telling you, as a man who's been around here for 100 years, you'll kill everybody on this planet. And I'm talking to young people. Don't let it happen. There are billions of planets in space where they cannot find a trace of life. So planet Earth become one of them. That kind of thinking is an invitation to do that. And say, stick with Justice Jackson and President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the commander-in-chief in World War II, respected by all the military, including me, who, as President of the United States, said, the world can no longer rely on force. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law. And that has been guiding me. I mean, law, not war. And it comes from Eisenhower and similar great military leaders who realize how dangerous any other policy is and will be.
Ben, what is the importance of the Nuremberg trials to international law?
That was a new concept. The human rights law was just beginning. And first, I have to explain the question you began off the record here, whether I thought the trials were just. I wrote the opening statement mostly on a Sunday, sitting by myself in the courtroom. The court was closed. And I thought, there cannot be any justice in a trial where I have 22 defendants convicted of murdering 1 million people. 22 out of 1 million. I mean, it's not just. I thought of, well, maybe I should chop the defendants up into 1 million pieces and feed them to the dogs or something like that. But I thought, no, I have to describe what I'm really after. And what I really wanted was a rule of law to protect everybody in the future. And that's what I said by crimes against humanity. These are crimes that are committed not against these particular victims who happen to be there, or killed by these particular criminals who happen to be killing them. But it has a new concept of law being there to protect people from that kind of victimization. And that's what I was trying to do then and now.
You can see he just corrected me there. He had 22 defendants, not 24. So I stand corrected, Ben. One thing that I think is also just worth noting is he was just talking about his opening statement. He does say in another part of his testimony that he used the word genocide. And I was surprised to hear that as a genocide scholar, because the term genocide was not actually formally adopted until after this trial. He's the first person to have used the term genocide when prosecuting people that have committed genocide. And it was years and years and years after that before the term was used again by the International Criminal Court. And he was first to use that, Susan, in 1947. But let me just finish with one question to him. Ben, what lessons do you have for us?
You have to be tolerant. You have to be ready to compromise. It's not a disgrace to compromise. You must approach your problems with tolerance and with compassion. And we do the opposite. We think it's heroic to kill your adversary. It's not heroic. It's better to reach a compromise.
Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, Stephen. So this technology is fantastic. Where is it available for people to see right now?
Well, as you can see, I'm showing that online right now, Susan, because what we're doing is developing the ability to be able to have these conversations for our classrooms. But what we do, we film them in very high fidelity so that in museums like your own, it's quite possible to install interviews where you've got, like we saw in the film a few moments ago, the full-size Holocaust survivor or witness, on a screen inside your museum. So you can see it actually. The closest one probably to you is at the Craig and Barbara Wiener Center in Davie. There's one in Florida. I think that's the only one in Florida right now. But then there's going to be, you'll see it in Skokie, Illinois, where they have a theater, which is a holographic theater, and also the Dallas Holocaust Museum, where there's a theater. And you'll also find in the Houston Holocaust Museum that there's a Holocaust survivor embedded into the museum. So as you're walking around, you can actually encounter them and ask questions. Ultimately, the plan is that for museums and centers, that they will be able to have the high fidelity holographic version, and then online we'll do different types of engagement with Holocaust survivors, so that students that can't visit a museum can still get the chance to ask their questions.
Great. Well, we look forward to exploring that some more here in Florida.
By the way, Ben Ferencz hasn't seen that interview himself yet, so I hope to get a week or two. I just want to say something about this, Ben at 100 years old. You could see there the camera light doing its little thing and whatever. Ben was setting up his own equipment in his own house because we couldn't go there with the pandemic. We sent him everything. And so the studio was set up with him and his housekeeper. And he did an absolutely incredible job. And so I have to say to my 85-year-old mom, she has no excuse anymore for saying that she can't handle technology, because as you can see, Ben did a remarkable job of leaving his legacy for future generations to ask him those questions, which is really, to him we're really grateful.
Absolutely. That's great. So obviously the Holocaust happened a long time ago now. It's been more than 75 years. And genocides continue to happen around the world and take so many lives. So how are Holocaust museums evolving to stay relevant and to engage younger generations in the issues facing them today, and where they will be the leaders of the future tackling these things?
Well, I'm looking at you, Susan, and all those words around you, behind you, that obviously is at the heart of your museum, where you are raising awareness with the people that visit your centre there about the need to confront hatred, to build peace. I can see what the words are. And I'm thinking, yes, okay, great. That little word cloud right behind you tells us. You know, if you'd have asked me 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, what's going to happen in the world of Holocaust museums, I would have probably said to you, well, come the 2020s, we're going to see, the demise of small Holocaust museums. As the survivor community leave us, it's going to be really difficult to sustain, and we're going to see probably half a dozen large museums survive. I could not have been more wrong, and I am happy that I was wrong, because I think what's happening is our communities are rallying together and realizing there was a point in time, necessarily, where we fought for memory and we fought for justice, and we had to ensure that the Holocaust was not forgotten, because it was quite possible that it would have been. Having achieved that, and having created our centers, we then created, in a sense, a moment in time where we said, okay, that's important work that we did. Now, how do we convey this to the generation that is now thinks that the Holocaust was ancient history? There was the Romans, there was the Enlightenment, and there was the Holocaust, and it all seems as equally as distant to them. How do you bring it into their lives? And we're living in a world in which they can see on their devices every single day the consequence of hate. Unfortunately, we've seen it in the last week, what the consequences of hate are. And we need to be able to work with them and say, even though we think of the Holocaust as being an extraordinary period of history, and the consequences were extraordinarily evil and extraordinarily bad, and nothing's happened before or since like it, but it came out of an ordinary set of circumstances where ordinary people made extraordinarily bad decisions about how they would live their lives and how they would treat others. What we have to do is bring that lesson and not just say never again. We have to bring that lesson into our classrooms and into our museums like you are doing, and transform them into places where we can inspire this next generation to own their values and to bring the voices of the Holocaust survivors not as artifacts of history, but as guides to life. And I think that's the power of oral history and the power of testimony, which I know we're all trying to use in our different institutions to inspire this generation.
2 years ago, at our in-person Triumph dinner, our guest speaker was former neo-Nazi Christian Picciolini. And he shared his own story of how he was recruited into that hate movement, and then his story of redemption and how he has now dedicated his life to getting others out of those movements and really trying to make up for the horrible deeds that he says he did as a younger person. And he shared some of the scary facts about the white nationalist movement that he's very much an expert on. So just continuing what you were saying, but how do you think Holocaust education can combat this type of hatred and violence?
Yeah, well, I think it's great that you had Christian on your event, and I think actually one of the principles that I feel are very strong is that we have to learn about how people become hateful or violent from the people that become hateful and violent, because in a sense, if we classify them as monsters that are some kind of other kind of being to the rest of us, we miss the point entirely that in fact they're not monsters, they're human beings who've made choices that are extremely bad and extremely dangerous for other human beings. You may not know this, but the Shoah Foundation has a project on documenting contemporary anti-Semitism. And we also document contemporary genocides. So in fact, we have now 10 genocides that are in the archive of the Shoah Foundation, Rwanda and Cambodia and others. Included in the Rwanda collection, for example, are some perpetrators who committed the genocide. And we purposefully include them and interview them as a part of that program, because we want to know, why did neighbors turn against neighbors? And I can tell you, for having worked there for years and years, it's not because they're a third world country with some history of tribal conflict, because in fact there was no tribal conflict in Rwanda, because the Hutu and the Tutsi and the Twa were all part of one tribe. They were part of actually 18 tribes that were not divided by ethnicity. Guess where the ethnicity thing came from? You got it. We imported it from Europe to Africa because they didn't have it until the Europeans turned up. So, as one of my Rwandan colleagues said to me when I went to work there, he said, I'm so glad you're here to teach us about genocide, because it's not something we're very familiar with until recently, but you Europeans know it really well, which is actually a very, very good point. Now, one of the things that we do, Susan, is we take testimonies about contemporary anti-Semitism, because I'm very much of the view that any form of anti-Semitism in the current day is a manifestation of what happened in the 1930s, actually in the 19th century, and in the 17th century, and so on. We have all of these antecedents, and genocide. When we hear anti-Semitism, it comes with the threat of genocide, because we know now for a historical fact, if you leave anti-Semitism unchecked, it can lead to the genocide of Jewish people. It's a plain fact. So we are very interested in, how do we document this? Now, one of the groups of people that we interview are actually former anti-Semites, because we want to know, how did you become an anti-Semite? What were you thinking? How did you go about that? And how did you get out of it? Because we want to be able to reverse these trends. And we have some really, really compelling interviews. What's also interesting is, and a part of the pedagogy of what we do is, I'm interested in, who are the least likely people that you might want to turn to in order to help you defeat anti-Semitism. And so, in fact, we have interviewed many Muslim people who are a part of the community of people who are talking about what are they doing to defeat anti-Semitism. I'll share one quick story with you. Nidal is a Palestinian. His grandparents live in Ramallah. He was brought up in Copenhagen. His father went there for work, and family moved there. And on the day that the shooting took place in the Copenhagen synagogue, it was his wife's birthday. He'd bought her flowers, but they went down to the synagogue and they took the flowers and they laid them at the synagogue. Now, it was obvious they were a Muslim family because his wife wears a hijab. So somebody came out and they expect to get chased away. In fact, what happened was, the gentleman with the yarmulke came to him and said, "Thank you for being here. It means a great deal to us that you came down." He went home and he said, "That was strange. That Jewish person thanked me. I need to do something in return." And he was the gentleman that formed the peace ring around the synagogue. And he brought together Muslims and Christians and Jews, and they formed the peace ring. And to me, he is such a good example. He said, as far as I'm concerned, when I go to see my grandparents in Ramallah, Israel had always been the enemy. He said, but what happened is I got to meet Israelis and I got to meet Jewish people, and I discovered they're not my enemy, they're just people. And why had I formulated this view? And I think he's a good example of what we need to be doing through our education programs, of bringing people who are not like each other together and providing them the examples and the pathways of how to break down those barriers and start to trust each other more, because that's all we needed in Germany in the 1930s, and it wasn't there, and in Poland, and the Ukraine, and Belarus, and Latvia, and Lithuania. It wasn't there. And so there was no help at hand once the Holocaust began. We can't wait till then. We have to act now, and that's, I think, what the programs are all about.
So, and that is a wonderful note to end on. We have to act now. Do you have any other final words before we wrap up, Stephen?
No, I think the only thing I would say, Susan, is thank you for inviting me. We can only do this when we work together. And I'm so grateful to be able to speak to your community, because what you do together in supporting the museum in Naples and making sure that these young people have this history and learn these lessons cannot be underestimated. So I hope everyone's going to be very generous and support today. I will be absolutely clear with you that I'm here because I want to see the work you do succeed and go from strength to strength. And we have to do that with strength in numbers, We have to also get behind it financially and support it, and make sure that those young people have an increase, a really, really meaningful experience that they will never forget for the rest of their lives. And so thank you to all of you that support the Center and for all the work you do together with us.
Yes. And thank you so much for being with us tonight, Stephen.
Pleasure.